Chairman Bryant, Chairman Kurtzman, good morning, and honorable members of the Senate and House. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Carlton Washington, and I'm the Executive Director of the South Carolina State Employees Association. Our association is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization established to represent the welfare of state employees and retirees. I'm here today to represent the interests of the 32,000 state employees all across the state. You should know that every day, South Carolina's employees are on the front lines of enacting laws, helping citizens, delivering vital services all across our state. They are the corrections officers, the nurses, the mental health workers, the sanitation employees, the social workers, the firefighters, and so many others who keep our state running safely and efficiently. South Carolina's 5 million citizens, along with all of the state's businesses, depend on the services that they provide. Their work is vital to all of us. As you evaluate the South Carolina retirement system and its long-term solvency, I ask you to strongly consider how your decisions will affect the men and women who serve our state and also their families. I also ask you to think about how retirees in our state economy will be affected by the recommendations made by this committee. We all know the issues. The retirement system has been underfunded for years, while benefits such as cost of living increases for retirees have never been funded. To stop the bleeding, the General Assembly passed Act 278 in 2012. The act raised the amount employees contributed to the retirement system, and it also decreased the amount of cost of living increases that retirees get from 2% to 1% or $500, whichever is greater. In 2012, it was hoped that future increases in employee contributions would not be necessary if the Investment Commission met its assumed rate of return, which was 7.5%. Unfortunately, the last 2 years, that has not been the case. Last year, the return was 1.6%, and this year, the final tally came in a few weeks ago, and it was negative 0.39%. It's clear to everyone that the state pension system needs money. No one can dispute that fact. There are no easy answers to make decades of underfunding go away. However, we cannot place this burden on active employees, teachers, or law enforcement officers, along with so many others who serve our state and its citizens. We also shouldn't place the burden on state retirees. They desperately need the 1% cost of living that they get just to survive. That money should be completely taken off the table when funding options are considered. It's simply not right to have state employees or retirees shoulder this burden. I make this point for several reasons. First, state employees already have some of the lowest wages in the nation, making it very difficult for them to contribute more to the retirement system. South Carolina ranks near the bottom in pay. A large number of state employees are not paid a living wage. Many, even those with years of service, qualify for public assistance or have to work second jobs. In 2015, the General Assembly funded an independent study of employee salaries compared with employees in similar jobs. Compared with their counterparts in other states and the private sector, state employees in South Carolina are grossly underpaid. On average, state employees in South Carolina make 15% less than their counterparts in other states and 20% less than the private sector. State employees in South Carolina are at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to pay, ranking in the bottom 10 states nationally, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Not only do South Carolina state employees make less money, they are spending more for health care and retirement benefits comparatively. In some states, the overall competitiveness of the benefits package offsets the salaries. This is simply not the case in South Carolina. Further, state employees' salaries have not kept pace with the rising costs of health care, food, and other necessities. The South Carolina Department of Administration reported that 75% of state employees, that would be over 20,000 state employees, men and women serving our state, make less than $39,692 annually. 75%. Making less than $40,000 a year is not enough to secure a modest standard of living when factoring in child care, transportation, taxes, and other necessities. The annual budget for a one-parent, one-child income, modest standard of living in Columbia, South Carolina, is $43,694. Again, I want to emphasize that over 20,000 employees fall below that level, 75% of our workforce. Many of these employees have 12 to 15 years of service to the state. Consider the position of probation and parole officer, a critical position that requires a college degree. This job starts out at around $26,000 a year. With that salary, it's almost impossible to pay student loans and to raise a family. I'm sure you agree with me that parole officers are vital to the safety of South Carolina. Because wages in this job are so low, we cannot ask these men and women to contribute more. Taking a national perspective, South Carolina state workers are well below the nation's median household income for 2015, which was $56,500, up 5.2% from 2014, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. This was the largest increase since the Bureau started taking note of this in 1967. Incomes rose sharply for households on every rung of the ladder. Of course, in South Carolina, employees were thankful to receive a 3.25% cost of living increase, but wages still lag far behind neighboring states and jobs in the private sector. I would also like to note that while the cost of living bump was appreciated, it really ended up being 2.75% because employees had to contribute an additional 0.5% in retirement contributions. While wages have not been keeping pace with rising costs, state employees have been asked to do more, to pay more for health insurance, federal taxes, while facing layoffs and furloughs. The employee cost sharing of 21.3% for health care is well above the 7 to 15% in other state governments. Many are working for less now than they did when they first started out with state government. With pay lagging, we can't afford to place an additional burden on our employees by requiring them to pay more. My second point for you to consider is that South Carolina state workers already pay considerably more in pension fund contributions than their counterparts in other states, who contribute less than 6% of their salaries on average. In fact, South Carolina employees pay more in retirement contributions than any other state in the Southeast. For state employees, required contributions have been growing quickly and steadily since 2010. In 2010, the contribution rate was 6%. The next year, it went to 6.5%. The next year, it went to 7%. The next year, it went to 7.5%. By 2014, we were at 8%. Then it went to 8.16%. And with this year's increase, we tally out at 8.66% for employee contributions. Where do these increases end? When you couple the surges of the last 6 years with the fact that we already pay more than the national average and more than any other state in the Southeast, it's just not responsible to ask state employees to pay more. As you are considering solutions, it's very clear that the answer to this deficit is not on the back of our employees. The third point I bring to you is that as pension contributions go up, meaning overall compensation goes down, the morale of our workforce suffers. There is a direct correlation between salary, job satisfaction, and retention. Salary satisfaction, which would be adversely affected if employees were forced to pay more, has a significant impact on commitment and job satisfaction. There is a high level of dissatisfaction among state employees toward the salary they are currently receiving. We cannot afford to reduce those salaries by increasing contributions. Surely morale will suffer across all state agencies. As morale goes down, it makes it even more difficult to retain quality employees in state government. Many workers are leaving for the private sector where they can make 15 to 20% more to support their families. If state employees are faced with keeping even less of their hard-earned money because of continued increases, state agencies will see increased challenges with recruitment and retention, which is the fourth point I'm here to make to you today. If we can't recruit and retain good employees, our best and brightest, South Carolina state government has a critical problem on its hands. With increased turnover, ongoing training costs increase dramatically. Everyone suffers: state employees, state agencies, and ultimately the citizens of South Carolina. During the economic downturn and as part of the legislative effort to streamline state government, state employees were asked to do more with less. State employees are increasingly taking on the jobs of 3 to 4 former colleagues with no pay increase. This challenge is additionally complicated by South Carolina's remarkable population growth. South Carolina has the nation's 10th fastest growing state, increasing in population since 1995, when we had 3.5 million citizens, until today, where we have just under 5 million citizens. Yet, we have 10,000 fewer state employees than we did in 1995. Some of our most critical state agencies already are having trouble luring and holding employees, a problem that could be compounded if you were to require additional contributions. Our State Highway Patrol is a prime example. The department is losing more troopers than it is training each year. Approximately 100 troopers a year are jumping ship for the private sector, local sheriff's offices, or city police. That costs literally millions of dollars in state money as we have to continue to recruit and train more employees. The high officer turnover is compounding already critical problems in law enforcement and corrections. The Department of Social Services is another example where recruiting and retaining workers is critical to protecting our state's most vulnerable children and the older population. The General Assembly directed DSS to add caseworkers last year after it was revealed that 12 children who had interacted with the agency during the past 5 years had died. Even with the new positions approved last year, social workers are still carrying an average of 68 cases instead of the target number of 50. Also, DSS is experiencing a very high turnover rate for its employees of almost 10%. The unacceptable result is that children and families suffer. We have a responsibility as a state to ensure that children and the elderly have been abused or neglected are protected. The third example I want to share with you is the Department of Corrections, which is forced to go to great lengths to recruit and retain employees. The agency is taking out full-page ads in the Sumter Daily Item. I brought a copy for you to review, and I think there's one on the desk. These are the ads. The agency has been forced to conduct a major recruiting campaign with billboards, radio, as I mentioned, newspaper, and 5 full-time recruiters. These efforts, of course, take time away from the agency's core function. In fact, there is a magnetic board inside the Department of Corrections that lists every agency that they're responsible for and how short they are on manpower. On average, the agency is short-staffed by more than 500 employees. The staffing shortage means dorms are often on lockdown to protect the safety of inmates and correctional officers who are vastly outmanned. The General Assembly approved a $1,500 pay bump for correctional staffers, which boosted their salary to $26,375. The raise, however, wasn't enough to knock the Department of Corrections staffers from being one of the lowest paid law enforcement jobs in the state. Turnover rates for the Department of Corrections first-year officers is as high as 50%. These are just a few examples of state agencies that are having difficulty recruiting and retaining employees. Making state workers pay more for retirement, meaning their take-home pay will decrease, surely will compound these problems. A fifth point I offer to you today is that increasing contributions would have a negative economic impact on the state in several ways. Small mom-and-pop businesses like yours, Senator Bryant, will be the ones to suffer most, since state employees tend to spend money in their local communities. If we continue to reduce what they can spend by raising their contribution rates, it absolutely will affect our economy. Looking at economic impact is a perfect place to talk about state retirees and how your decisions could impact them. It's possible that as you look for ways to make the pension fund solvent, you could consider eliminating the 1% cost of living increase retirees receive each year. This number, as mentioned, was cut from 2% to 1%. It's imperative that retirees keep their 1% COLA and that those funds are totally off the table. The 1% is critical to retirees who are living on a shoestring budget with an average income of $19,000 a year. 1% is simply important to their survival. And it's also important to the survival of the mom and pop businesses where they spend money. It's important to note that 94% of state employees who retire remain in South Carolina, spend their money here, and circulate it in our local economy. The challenge this committee faces certainly is not an easy one. Our state employees, however, should not be forced to bear that burden. I urge this committee and the General Assembly to find a way to fix this problem that doesn't put additional burden on state workers. I want to point to two recent examples where that has happened, where money was found in the state budget to help certain groups without passing along additional costs. First, when the state farmers faced the fallout from last October's historic flooding, the General Assembly gave those farmers a lifeline, $40 million in aid, to help farms in flood-ravaged communities. Farmers didn't pay for the weather fiasco, which was not caused and was no fault of their own. This is very similar to the situation that state employees find themselves in. Also, the General Assembly found a way last session to repair South Carolina's crumbling roads without raising taxes or fees for South Carolina citizens. The road system will eventually take $40 billion to complete, twice the amount the retirement system needs. In both of these examples, solutions were found without hurting a select group of folks, and we must try to figure out how to do that on behalf of state employees. Ultimately, the General Assembly will have to decide where the low-hanging fruit is to deal with the deficit. From the outside looking in, one such example would be the $3 billion in sales tax exemptions given to South Carolina businesses, a number greater than the $2.4 billion actually being collected. If the $3 billion in exemptions were eliminated for 6 years, it would generate $18 billion that could be used to help fix the problem. It's noteworthy that these businesses receiving exemptions are benefiting from the services of state government. So basically, they are getting services free while others are paying for them. Making a proactive change in this area could put a big dent in the unfunded liability. I call on you to do what's right. I urge you to take a stand with me and truly represent the people who serve us every day as state employees, as well as the 5 million citizens who depend on capable and competent state employees for their service. I ask you to take 2 important steps as you look for solutions. 1, decide that there should be no more increases in the amount employee contributions make to the retirement system. And secondly, maintain the 1% cost of living increase for retirees. In closing, I urge you to look elsewhere to find ways to make the pension fund solvent again. We cannot saddle state employees with more costs or reduce benefits for retirees. Simply put, our state employees are already maxed out, and the pay scenario is already horrible. There would be a service impact to 5 million citizens if we don't have capable and competent state employees. It would not be responsible to raise contribution. There is no way around that fact. And for your review, in your packet, you have the contribution increases since 2010. You also have a population chart and a state employee chart from 1995 until today. You have the employee pay band, and you also have the monthly budget. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my comments.
Thank you, Carl.